Sometimes just because God offers you a gift doesn't mean it's automatically yours. You may still actually have to do something to go take it. Today we're going to see what Joshua had to do in order to start taking the promised land on this week's lesson. Hello, welcome to this week's lesson. I'm Brian Vermeer, and we're continuing our series in the book of Joshua. Today we're going to be in Joshua chapter 6, and we're going to begin the conquest of the promised land. Joshua and the people have crossed the river. They are right next to the city of Jericho, and Jericho is the first target on their list. And even though God has promised to give them the promised land, they still actually have to do the work and do the conquering. But we'll see how God always has a plan for them doing this. Before I begin, I'd like to remind you, if you enjoy these lessons, please hit the like button. Please leave comments if you have any questions or anything you'd like to say. And if you can, please support me on my Patreon page. You'll see a link in the video description and also at the end of this video. All right, so let's talk about the conquest of Jericho. Again, Joshua has led the Israelites across the Jordan River. He has sent 2 spies into the land of Jericho to kind of scout it out. He has found out that the people of Jericho are afraid of the Israelites, which should make the conquest easier. But we're going to see that God's plan for conquering the city is actually quite a bit different than what we would think of today as traditional warfare. We're also going to talk a little bit about what the Israelites did to the people of Jericho and how we can justify that with Christian thinking. So let's take a look at Joshua chapter 6. God has given the plan to Joshua, and now we're going to see Joshua carrying out this plan. So let's look at verses 12 to 14 of Joshua chapter 6. It says, Joshua got up early the next morning. The priests took the ark of the Lord, and the 7 priests carrying 7 ram's horns marched in front of the ark of the Lord. While the ram's horns were blowing, the armed men went in front of them, and the rear guard went behind the ark of the Lord. On the second day, they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. This you might consider a classic exercise in what today we call psychological operations or psychological warfare. Joshua gets up, he gets the army together, he puts them in a marching order. He has the Ark of the Covenant in front. Now remember, the Ark represents God's presence. The Ark is where God would come to meet with the leader of Israel. So, by putting the Ark in front, they're showing that they're placing God at the front of their battle. And whenever we have a battle, whenever we have something that we need to conquer, whenever we have a difficult task, we need to remember, put God first. Let God lead the way. And follow God through the difficult task. So first we have the ark, then we have 7 priests carrying ram's horns. And it says, the horns were blowing. The army goes up to the city. They walk once completely around the city, and then they return to camp. And the whole time they're doing this, you know the army of Jericho is up on the wall just watching them. None of the Israelites are saying anything. None of them are speaking. They're just going up, marching around the city, and going back. Now, the first day they do this, the army of Jericho is probably just thinking, okay, they're doing what we would call a reconnaissance mission here. They're marching completely around the wall. They're looking for a weak spot. They're looking for a hidden entrance or anything that they might exploit in order to get through the wall and get into the city, or maybe where would be the easiest place to knock the wall down or something like that. But then it says they did this for 6 days. The next day, the army comes up again. They walk around the city once, and then they go back. Okay, that's strange. They did that yesterday. Why did they do that again? The third day, they come up and they do this again. This is all getting in the heads of the army of Jericho. Why are they doing this? They're coming up, walking around, and leaving. The first day, okay, maybe it was a recon, or maybe they came up and saw, how strong the wall is, and they decided to leave. But now they're doing it again, and again, and again. This is not what you would consider traditional warfare. This is not standard tactics. And they're getting inside the heads of the Jericho army. They're making them even more afraid. What are they up to? We don't know what they're doing. You always study your enemy and you learn the way your enemy fights. And if your enemy fights unconventionally and you're not trained to handle that, then it can mess with you. When people do things that are completely unexpected, it messes with you. So this is what they're doing to the people of Jericho here now. Now this is all God's plan. You go up, you march around, you go back. That's all it is. And this is part of God's plan. And part of this plan may simply have been to keep the people of Jericho on edge. Okay, when are they actually going to attack? How are they going to attack? What are they going to do? What are they doing now? We just don't know. And the unexpected is often the scariest thing in the world. Well, they do that for 6 days. So what happens on the 7th day? Let's take a look now at verses 15 to 19 to see what happened on the 7th day. It says, early on the 7th day, they started at dawn and marched around the city 7 times in the same way. That was the only day they marched around the city 7 times. After the 7th time, the priests blew the ram's horns, and Joshua said to the troops, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city, but the city and everything in it are set apart to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and everyone in her house will live because she hid the messengers we sent. But keep yourselves from the things set apart, or you will be set apart for destruction. If you take any of those things, you will set apart the camp of Israel for destruction and make trouble for it. For all the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are dedicated to the Lord and must go into the Lord's treasure." So the 7th day comes. The army comes up just like they did before. Now the people of Jericho are saying, okay, they're going to do it again. They're going to march around once and go home. But this time, they go around once, and then they start going around again. And again, this is getting in the army's head now. Okay, now what are they doing? They're doing something different this time. And they end up marching around the city completely 7 times. Now, I'm not usually really big into numerology. 7, I've been told, is the number of completeness in the Bible. So marching around the city 7 times could be symbolic of God is completely giving this city to the Israelites. And that could be the reason for the 7 times if you want to take the numbers really seriously about it. But then listen to what Joshua says. He tells the people to shout because God has given them the city. Don't shout because God will give you the city. He's already given you the city. When God's made up his mind is made up, and it's going to happen. You can treat it as if it's a past event, because that's how definite it is. Joshua is saying this city is already ours. All we're going to have to do is just run in and take it. But he says there are some instructions here. There's some special instructions you've got. He says, everything has been set apart to the Lord for destruction. And you'll see this phrase, set apart, several times here. This word for set apart specifically means set apart to be destroyed. In other words, destroy everything in the city. Burn the entire city to the ground. And that includes all of the people. Kill everyone in the city. The only things you're allowed to take out of the city are all the gold, silver, precious metals, probably gems, treasure. And you can't even keep that. That all goes into the Lord's treasury. That is all being given to the Lord. and everything else is to be destroyed. There's going to be no plunder, no spoils of war in this battle. The only people who are to survive are Rahab the prostitute and the people who she has in her house. If you remember when they sent the spies in, Rahab hid the spies, sent the guards in a different direction, and then told the men, look, we know you're going to take the city, so please just spare my life since I spared yours. And they said, okay, everyone you want to save, bring into your house, hang this scarlet cord by the window so we'll know which house it is. And then everyone that's within that house will be saved. You just stay in the house and we'll come get you. And everyone else is going to be killed. Now, some people have a problem with this. Why is God telling them to kill every man, woman, and child in Jericho? That doesn't seem to make sense. If God is a loving God, why is he allowing everyone in this city to be destroyed? Why is he telling Israel to murder everyone in this city? We need to look at it from the other side. Jericho was a city that did not believe in God. Jericho was a city that the people in it had heard of God, certainly because of Abraham many years before. But they didn't follow God. They didn't believe in God. They turned away from God if they ever believed. So they had their chance to follow God, and they chose not to do it. Therefore, God is not just using Israel to capture the city and giving Israel the promised land. God is also passing judgment on the unbelievers. And that's the way we need to look at it. God is using Israel to bring judgment against unbelievers, against people who refuse to follow God. And that's why he's saying kill everybody. They had their chance. They had a chance to follow God. They chose not to do it. And one day God is going to send everyone who chooses not to follow him into an eternal punishment. This is judgment. This also is getting rid of an evil influence. If Israel were to let the people of Jericho live, these people, being unbelievers, would not necessarily become followers of God. They would probably continue in their unbelief, and as such, they would be a negative influence on the people of Israel. They would be trying to convince the people of Israel to follow their gods. And they would probably succeed. Because we all have this natural tendency to turn against God. That's our sinful nature. So God is saying completely get rid of this influence. Completely destroy them. This is also setting an example for the next city and the next. Look what they did to Jericho. They completely destroyed it. Maybe if we surrender, they'll be nicer to us. So God has his reasons, and we need to trust God that his reasons are good. We may not understand why God is saying kill every man, woman, and child, especially the innocent children. God knew these children would not grow up and remain innocent. So God just said, let's just go ahead and get rid of them all now, before they start being a bad influence on my people. Anything you have in your life that is being a bad influence, you need to get rid of. You need to destroy, completely get out of your life. Anything that is keeping you from following God, you need to get rid of. And if it means destroying it, then you destroy it. And that's why God is telling them, go in here and destroy everything. He says everything is set apart for destruction. And he warns the Israelites, keep yourselves from the things set apart. Don't take any plunder. Don't take any spoils of war. Just because you're going through there and you're killing the people, you see something in their house that you like. No, you can't take it. If it's precious metal, it goes into the treasury. If not, you burn it. He says, if you take things that are set apart for destruction, then you will be set apart for destruction. Unfortunately, we're going to see this a little bit later. And you will set apart the camp of Israel for destruction. You're going to infect, you might say, the whole camp. Just a little bit of sin can spread quickly through a good people. One sinner who you tolerate is soon going to influence the whole assembly, the whole group. So you've got to stop it while you can. This is why we can't tolerate sinful lifestyles. We can't just say, well, you live your life, and allow it within the church and allow it within our Christian assemblies, because it will be an influence. It will bring everyone else down. So all the precious metals are to go to God. Everything else is to be destroyed. So let's look now at verses 20, 21 and see the follow through here. It says, so the troops shouted and the ram's horn sounded. When they heard the blast of the ram's horn, the troops gave a great shout and the wall collapsed. The troops advanced into the city, each man straight ahead, and they captured the city. They completely destroyed everything in the city with the sword, every man and woman, both young and old, and every ox, sheep, and donkey. So the people shouted, the priests blew the horns, and the wall just collapsed. Ruins have been found of walls around the city of Jericho. Jericho today is one of the oldest occupied cities in the world, if not the oldest still occupied city in the world. They've done a lot of archaeological work there, and they have found walls that have formerly surrounded the city that have collapsed. And the interesting thing about some of these walls they have found is that they collapsed not inward like they were attacked from outside, but they've collapsed outward, and almost as if the city exploded. Not the way a normal city's walls would be taken. The troops, the Israelite troops, advanced into the city. Remember, they're completely surrounding the city. It says each man ran straight ahead. The walls were completely down, so each man was able just to run forward into the city. It says they captured the city, and they completely destroyed everything with the sword. Every man, every woman, and every animal. They destroyed everything that they could find. Every living thing in that city was put to death. Everything that could burn was burned. If it couldn't burn, it was at least knocked down. We see the Israelites here following through on God's instructions. God said, I've given you the city. But notice the Israelites still had to go in and take it. God can promise us everything in the world, but oftentimes we still have to go get it. I remember a preacher I had once who used to always do this demonstration where he would say, he'd hold out a dollar bill and he'd call up one of the kids in the congregation. And he'd say, this dollar bill is a gift to you. And he'd wait for the kid to come get it. And he'd say, look, it's a gift. But notice, it's not yours until you actually come and take it. You have to claim it. God has gifts that he wants to give us, but we have to claim those gifts. The greatest one being the gift of salvation. God offers the gift of salvation to everybody, but you have to take it. You have to accept it. You have to work for some of the things that God wants to give you. God has a plan for your life, but you still have to follow the plan. God's not just going to drop everything into your lap because you have faith or because you believe. Sometimes you've got to actually do things to go get them. And that's the lesson here. God gave the city of Jericho to the Israelites, but they still had to actually go in and take it. God didn't just make the people disappear. He didn't drive them away. The Israelite army had to go in and take the city. Well, what about Rahab and her family? Well, let's finish up now looking at verses 22 to 25. It says, Joshua said to the 2 men who scouted the land, "Go to the prostitute's house and bring the woman out of there and all who are with her, just as you swore to her." So the young men who had scouted went in and brought out Rahab and her father, mother, brothers, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her whole family and settled them outside the camp of Israel. They burned the city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. However, Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, her father's family, and all who belonged to her, because she hid the messengers Joshua had sent to spy on Jericho, and she still lives in Israel today. So Joshua kept the 2 men who were the original spies, the 2 spies. He knew who they were. He had them with him. And as soon as the walls fell, he told these 2 men, "You go to her house and you go get her." He sends them because, first of all, they know where her house is. They know what sign to look for. And Rahab would trust them. These would be the same men that she saw before. So that way she would know when they come in the house, she would know, okay, they're not here to kill us. They're here to save me like they said they would. So they went, and it says they got her. And apparently in her house, she had her father, her mother, her brothers, everyone who belonged to her. It says her extended family was in the house with her. And they saved them just like they promised they would. But do you also notice something here? It says they brought out her whole family. But where did they live? It says they settled them outside the camp of Israel. She did not get to live with the Israelites. She had to live outside their camp. Why is that? Because they're Gentiles. Because they weren't Hebrews. They weren't Israelites. God at this time is still trying to keep his people pure. Not all of these people in Rahab's family are believers yet. They don't necessarily worship Israel's God yet. And as such, they can't be allowed into the assembly of Israel until they become believers. So that's why they were settled outside the camp. It says they burned the city and everything in it. They took all the metal, put it in the Lord's treasury like they're supposed to, but they spared Rahab and her family. And an interesting thing here it says she still lives in Israel today. Again, evidence that the book of Joshua was written very soon after the events occurred. At the time the book of Joshua was written, Rahab was still alive. So this is evidence for an early date for this book. This is not a story that was written hundreds of years later. This is a book that was written right then, which means that the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, were written before that. And a lot of biblical critics try to say, oh, you can't trust those, early books in the Old Testament. They weren't written till hundreds or 1,000 years after the events occurred. We don't know that the stories in them are true. Apparently, Rahab was still alive when the book of Joshua was written, which means people were still alive who knew what actually happened and could correct it if they needed to. Interesting thing about Rahab, the rest of the story is, if you read Matthew chapter 1, you find she marries an Israelite named Salmon. I like to think maybe he was one of the 2 spies. We don't know. But notice how God uses her. In Matthew chapter 1, it says she married Salmon, an Israelite. And she had a son. And this son is going to come up later. In a couple of months, we're going to do a study on the book of Ruth. And you're going to hear about a man named Boaz. And Boaz is the son of Rahab the prostitute. Boaz then is going to have a son named Obed. Obed is going to have a son named Jesse. Jesse is going to have a son named King David. And David, we know, is going to become an ancestor of Jesus. God said, kill everybody in Jericho, except for Rahab the prostitute, because she helped us, because she believed. And because she believed, she ends up becoming an ancestor of the Messiah. God can use anybody, as long as they're willing to give themselves to God. Don't think that God can't use you. God has great things that He wants for you. God has things that He wants you to do. But you have to believe. And you have to actually put forth the effort to do them. And if you do, then God has great things for you. Next week, we're going to look at someone who didn't quite follow the instructions Joshua gave him here, and what the consequences of that action were. So I'll see you then.